Okay, we're going to do Math Review 3-3, and this is for the advanced class. So we're going to start with dividing decimals. Here's your model. Notice that the very first thing that tells you that you need to write an equation for dividing decimals. So the very first thing that you should know is that your equation should be something divided by something, and because it's going to be an equation, you need to have that equal sign on there, and that's going to equal something. So if you have your division symbol, you get a star, and if you have your equal sign, you get a star, because it's supposed to be a division equation, so you got to have that division sign, and an equation has to have an equal sign, so that equal sign has to be there. Now the very first thing that we have to look at is how many little squares are shaded. So you can see that the very first model has a whole, everything is shaded, the whole thing, so that represents one whole. And then on the second one, we're going to say we have 5 columns, that represents 5/10. So my dividend is going to be 1 and 5/10. So if you have 1 and 5/10 for the dividend, that is the star that you would get. And it's being divided into 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 groups. So 1 and 5/10 divided by 5, 5 would be your divisor. That's going to give you the next star, not the second star, but the next star, the fourth star. And then finally, you got to figure out how many you have in each group. So inside each group, you have 1, 2, 3/10. So your answer, your quotient should be 3. And it's not just 3 wholes, but it's 3 columns. So that's 3/10. So it has to have the decimal in front, so the 3 can be in the 10th place. And it's good mathematical practice to put a 0 in front of the decimal when there is no whole numbers. So your quotient would be 3/10. You still get the star even if you don't put the 0 in front, but if you have to have the 3 in the 10th place for you to get the star. So that's it. You have 5 stars for here, and then the last thing is the key idea. So the key idea for this problem is the same thing as before, which is equations must have an equal sign. Give yourself a star if you have that key idea written down, and then you should end up with 6 total stars if you got everything right. If not, tell me how many you got on your paper for your problem, and then we'll add that up at the end of the math review. The next question is this one, multiplying decimals and with a model, and we need to write again an equation, so we need to have an equal sign, but this time is multiplying, so we have to multiply something. So something times something has to be equal to something. That's going to be our equation. So if you have your multiplication symbol, since this is a multiplication decimal model, then you need to have that multiplication symbol, and you get a star for that. And it needs to be an equation, so that equal sign has to be there, and there's your star for that one. And then you can see the model. It looks a little weird because of all the colors and how it's like jagged a little bit or something. So here's my suggestion to you. When you have something that's this confusing, go ahead and number them off. So you have each little square, you number them off, and you can see you have 8 yellow squares, that's 800s in the first section, and then you begin with blue, so that would be the next group. So that would be 1, 2, and then it picks up on the next column, so that ends up with 8 hundreds in that group. And if you keep doing that over and over, you'll see that you have 8 hundreds in each one of those groups, and it alternates. It goes from yellow to blue, yellow to blue, yellow to blue, until you have no more squares, and you end up with 8 hundreds in each and every one of those groups. So the very first thing that you need to tell me is that in this model you have 8 in each group. I mean in each in each color. But it's not 8 wholes, so you know that each little square represents 100, because it takes 100 of those little squares to fill in the whole entire whole. So the 8 has to be in the hundreds place. So yes, you have to put a 0 in the 10th place, and your decimal has to be in front of that 0. And it's good mathematical practice to put a 0 in the ones place when there is no wholes. So your first number should be 8/10 or 800s. That would give you a star. And then you multiply that times the number of groups you have. And the way that you count that so that you don't mess up is just count how many 8s you have, because you have to count 1 through 8 in every time, right? So there's 1 8 there. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 8s. So that means that we have 8 groups. So that's going to be your second factor. The first factor was 8 hundredths, and now it's 8 wholes because you have 8 groups. So this multiplication decimal model is multiplying a decimal times a whole number. And then the answer is how many total little hundreds you have colored in. So in this case, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows or 6 columns, and that represents tenths. So there should be a 6 in the tenths place. And then you have 4 more little squares at the end. So that's 4 hundredths. So there should be a 4 in the hundredths place. For your final product, the final answer, to be 64 hundredths. And that's going to be the last star for the equation. The key idea is the same thing as the other one with the models. Equations must have an equal sign. And that's the last star for this problem. So again, on this one, you also get 6 stars for total. The next is dividing decimals. And when you divide decimals, remember that the very first number, it's your dividend, and that's the number that goes inside of your division bracket. And then you have the divisor on the outside, so each one of those will give you a star if you put them in the right place. The next thing that you have to do is start with your division. Well, normally I would tell you that you have to do your multiples of your divisor, but in this case, because the divisor is just a one-digit number, I don't think that you need to do your list of 4s unless you just don't know them. But I won't give you stars for those unless we have a 2-digit divisor. In this case, it's just 1, so it should be easy. So we're going to start by looking at the decimal and bringing it up to the quotient. That is the very first step. If you did that, you get a star. The next step is to look at the 9. Can 4 go into 9? And the answer would be yes. It goes in there twice because 4 times 2 is 8. So the 2 in the quotient would get you a star, and then you have to subtract the 8 from the 9. And 9 minus 8 gives you 1. If you have that subtraction, you get a star. If you have that minus sign on there, remember. And then you're going to have to bring down the next number, which is the 8. So when you bring it down, you end up with 18. And 4 goes into 18 exactly 4 times, because 4 times 4 gives you 16. So you put the 4 in the quotient, that gives you a star, and you subtract the 16 from the 18, and you end up with 2 as a remainder. The next thing we have to do is give ourselves a star if you subtract the 16 from the 18. Now we look at the next digit and the last digit in our dividend, which is the 2. So we have to bring it down, making our remainder at 22. So 4 goes into 22 a total of 5 times. And 4 times 5, or the 5 gets you a star in the quotient, and now 4 times 5 gives you 20. So 22 minus 20 gives you a remainder of 2. Since we have a remainder still and we have no more digits in our dividend, we must now add, don't forget to give yourself this little star right here for subtracting 20 from the 22. But now, like I said, since we still have a remainder, we have to add a 0 inside the dividend so we can bring it down. And if you added that 0, I'm going to go ahead and give you a star for that 0 that you added. And then when you bring it down, you end up with a remainder of 20. So 4 goes into 20 5 times. There's going to be a 5 in the quotient. And we subtract 20 from 20. That's going to give you the last star when you subtract it. And then you're going to go ahead and write down your key idea, which in this case, the most important thing is to move the decimal point straight up. That way it ends up in the right place in your quotient. Okay, and originally, and that's a star as well. Originally I had said 12 stars, but I forgot to give you that star for the 0 that you added. So I'm going to erase that now, and I'm going to give you a total of 13 stars. That's how many stars you end up with this one. The next problem that we have, and the last problem, is multiplying decimals. So the first thing that I would like to do is multiply as whole numbers. So I'm going to forget about the decimal. And if you set it up like this, with the 3 digits on top and the 2 digits on the bottom, you get a star for that. Forget about those decimals for right now. That's the first step on multiplying decimal by decimal. Just multiply as if they were whole numbers. Next, start multiplying. 5 times 8 is 40, so there's my 0, carry the 4. Then 5 times 4 is 20, plus 4 gives me 24. Then bring up the 2. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12. So my first line should be 1,240. I'll give you a star if you have every one of those digits correct. The next thing that I have to do is put a placeholder since I'm finished with my first number, my first digit in my factor to multiply by. So that 0 gets you a star. And then you can multiply 4 times 8, which is 32. I'll put the 2 down, carry the 3. 4 times 4 is 16, plus the 3 up there gives you 19. So there's the 9, carry the 1. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 is 9. So you get a star also if you have every one of those digits, 9920, 9,920. And if you remember to put your plus sign, you get a star for that. Now when you add all these digits, 0 plus 0 gives you 0, so that gives you a star in your product if you have that. And then 4 plus 2 is 6, so that gives you a star as well. 9 plus 2 is 11, there's my 1, and that gives you a star. I'll carry the 1 in my finger, and 1 plus 9 is 10, plus 1 more in my finger gives me 11. So that gives me a star for that one, and then the other one gives me a star as well. Finally, we have the strategy of the bubbles, because these are not whole numbers. These were decimals to begin with. So now this is where I go back and I put my decimals where they belong, and I count how many digits are behind the decimal point. So in the first factor I have 3 digits, so I'll put a 3 inside that bubble. If you have that bubble with a 3, you get a star. The second factor has 2 digits behind the decimal, the 4 and the 5. So that gives me a total of 2. So that bubble with a 2 gives you a star as well. The next thing is to put the 2 bubbles together, the 3 and the 2. So 3 plus 2 gives me a total of 5. And that last bubble gets you a star as well. And that 5 means that you have to move the decimal from the right to the left 5 times. So here we go. We're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The little swoops that I just did give you a star. If you have 5 little swoops, and the decimal at the very end on the left in front of the first one gives you a star as well. Now remember, it's a good mathematical practice to put a 0 in front if there is no whole number, and in this case there isn't. So that is my final answer there, and then you're going to get a key idea, which should be the same thing as before, which is use the bubble strategy to place the decimal point in the product, and that's going to give you the last star. And in this problem we ended up with a total of 16 stars. So your reflection today, I want you to do this reflection right here. I want you to write down, I could teach blank because blank. So tell me why you could teach one of these skills. What is one thing that you could now teach because you're so good at it? And tell me why. How do you feel? Why do you feel confident that you can teach that? But the second part of that reflection would be, but I still need help on something else. I still need help with what? Okay, so do that reflection, and then you can do your total number of stars at the top of your paper. And in this case, we ended up with 6, 12, well, that wasn't 12, it ended up being 13, and 16. So if I put them all together, I have 6 plus 6 plus 6, which is 18, plus 3 would give me 21. So there's my 1 there, carry the 2, and 2 plus 1 gives you 4. So you have a total of 41 stars for this math review today. All right.